Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Communist Party's International Rally. We want to welcome all those people who may be from the nations of the G8 and elsewhere who have come out against to show their resistance against the owners of capital and their political wing, the so-called leaders of the free world. This is a historical day for many reasons, and is especially historical for the Communist Party of Ireland to be able to host such a strong international platform of speakers, of people and parties who are dug into the trenches of the class battlefield right across Europe. In solidarity, we salute your every effort in trying to raise class consciousness and resistance among your people, as we are in Ireland. It is also a historic day, for this is the day in which a clear anti-imperialist position is raised high for all to see, that we as communists, socialists, trade unionists, workers, activists and internationalists recognise that the imperialist order of the world, that the financial, industrial and political elites of the most industrialised nations on this planet continue to wage war against the vast majority of human race and on the planet itself, is evidence that we can no longer fight against their might individually. Let us continue the great communist tradition of international solidarity and unity, and repeat the slogan, an injury to one is an injury to all. At the national, local and workplace level, we must forge a politically class-conscious trade union movement, willing to defend the gains of workers. We must bring together progressive groups and communities that are fighting against austerity in all its manifestations to try and build a bigger movement to build the people's resistance. At the international level, we must build those bridges within trade union movements and political parties to their counterparts in other countries, especially here in Europe and especially in the periphery, the so-called pigs. It is our people, our class, that have been on the front line of the assault of capital, and so it is important that we acknowledge the plight of our brothers and sisters right across Europe and pronounce that we are Greece, we are Portugal, and we are Ireland. Here in Ireland, North and South, as in many other countries, the trade union movement has failed to mobilise working people in any meaningful way. But we can take inspiration from countries like Greece and the All-Militant Workers' Front of Parma, in partnership with the KKE, who have and continue to mobilise hundreds of thousands of workers and their families against the harsh austerity measures being imposed on them. We can also look to Spain and Portugal, where mass mobilisations of their citizens have taken to the city streets against austerity policies. And most recently, we've witnessed a strong social movements take place in Turkey, where the Turkish Communist Party have been on the front line. This sort of movement has the potential to be built here in Ireland, north and south, when the majority of the people awaken their class consciousness. We must build on the mobilisations that have taken place and strengthen the political work that is underway in the trade union movement. With our tiny island so divided, we must work harder to build unity between two communities on the basis of the fight for democracy and socialism. We must stand firm in the belief that Catholics and Protestants are not enemies, but that most comprise of communities of working people looking to better themselves. The north of Ireland is undergoing a double transition. In terms of its political dynamics, it is moving from a situation of overt conflicted democracy and violence to one where there is increasing disillusionment about the gap between ordinary people's income and the continuation of traditional sectarian politics at dormant. While the potential of the Good Friday agreements was supported in referenda north and south of the border, its economic sequel has seen the north moving from an economic framework that was formulated upon social democratic ideals to one that is dominated by market agendas and neoliberal policies. It is a thin veneer that divides each side, all the while activities which are essential to social stability and reproduction, health, housing, education, water and infrastructure are put out to tender in order to return a profit, usually through asset stripping and loan repayments to the private financial sector. This is the North's piece, and this is one that carries its own dangers for social stability. The gloss may soon wear off this shiny new Belfast. A united community, be they Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Jewish or lay, is a strong community, one in which the power those in power will find it harder to dismantle the welfare system and the condition of the working people and their families. So we must reiterate again that what we need is solidarity and unity, the goal of which will be the organisation of millions of working people sharing a common ground, sharing a common enemy, and sharing a new vision for a brighter future. We can bring forward an alternative, or as the title of the whole festival suggests, another world is possible. And the world in which we live today is typified by aggressive imperialist states and a union of imperialist states such as the EU and NATO and their money men of the IMF, the ECB and the World Bank, and is defined by the need of continuous war, of the capitalist mode of endless and ever-growing commodity production, of the most aggressive form of exploitation of human labour, of natural resources, and what seems to be an ever-growing race to the bottom. A world in which the distribution of wealth is so skewed in favour of the capitalist class and the imperialist states that around 9.5 million people hold 81% of the world's wealth, the global elite, while over 6.5 billion people hold only 19% of the world's wealth. Capitalist growth is in direct contradiction with equality and the ecological system. And with close to 60% of the world's billionaires residing in North America and Europe alone, it's no wonder that the Communist Party labelled the G8 as a committee for the rich for protecting the rich. This is the imperialist order. This is the capitalist mode of production, of private ownership in the epoch of monopolies, the necessity of war to expand and stabilise markets for profit creation, the constant struggle of capital to recreate itself at the expense of humanity and the planet. And this is what we're here today fighting against. Throughout Europe, people have been tried and sentenced to a future of debt, austerity and social deprivation. This is the real human existence under capitalism. National governments have acted as the courts, while the complicit political parties in power and in opposition act as the judge, jury and executioner. The financial and economic elite, the owners of capital, have demanded that working people pay for the crisis of capitalism that erupted in 2008 and which continues today without any sign of letting up. This parasitic class have been and are willing to sacrifice local populations so that it may continue to grow and expand. And all the analysis shows that they are expanding, that their wealth, their income is growing and will continue to grow as long as Labour bows down to its every demand. It is they, the capitalist class, the imperialist powers, which manifests itself this weekend in the form of the G8 that have put us on trial. And it is our own national governments that have facilitated this vilification of working people and its resistance. Today, let it be clear that the Communist Party of Ireland says no more. It is we, the working people, the creators of wealth, who should be putting the owners of capital, who amass their wealth through rent, interest, exploitation, war and blunder on trial, for they have an impoverished, polluted and ailing world to answer for. At a time in history that is unparalleled in terms of wealth creation and technological advancement, there has never been as many people in want of the basic needs in life: food, water, clothing and shelter, and especially in the non-developing countries. The Socialist Voice, our paper, puts this system of capitalism and human misery on trial every month, and since the onset of the crisis has been clear in finding it guilty of the ensuing misery and mess. Not individuals, not greed, not public sector workers, but the system itself. The Communist Party has been clear from day one of the crisis that it is a crisis of capitalism, of the system itself. The establishment's response has been to transfer private debt and risk onto the shoulders of working people, while also transferring public wealth into private hands. With this, they've also begun a restructuring of the economy toward a lower paid and precarious workforce to meet the needs of increasingly international and mobile capital. We were clear from the beginning that the austerity policies being imposed were results of the socialisation of private debt, and so this is why we call for the repudiation of their private debt. With a century past that saw the greatest development and gains for the working class, we are now in the midst of the greatest dispossession of the working class. Health, education, housing and work are no longer guaranteed in the most developed nations, if they were in the first place. More and more, these forms of public welfare are being privatised and left to the market, rather than national governments to be developed, with the result in the final analysis that if there is no profit to be made, then there is no service to be provided, regardless of the social necessity. And it's that simple. And yet swathes of well-educated populations across the world are being hoodwinked into supporting such privatisation policies. The ever-widening gap of the rich and poor between the have and have-nots is well documented. However, like a rabbit caught in the headlights, a paralysis has set into some progressive social movements, which has led to a very weak anti-government agenda devoid of an imperialist analysis. This has been to the detriment of building a people's resistance against the attacks on working people and their families. And remember when the American people were promised change and so voted for change, and all they got was shortchanged. And the Irish people who were made vote twice on an EU treaty were promised jobs and also voted in new governments promising an easing of the debt. Well, all we got was rising unemployment, and we're now in perpetual debt. The EU promised the people of Europe stability and growth. Now the people of Europe are ravaged by instability, debt and austerity. The G8 promised peace and prosperity. Where is this peace and where is the prosperity? In reality, what we have is an escalation of wars and rising absolute and relative poverty. We have to be clear to working people and say that austerity is working. It is making us pay for their debt. Profits have been restored. The rich are getting richer. It is working. It is meant to work this way. Austerity is not a neutral technical economic policy. It is class war. It is global, and our internal troika of the Fine Gael, Labour Party and Fianna Fáil all implement and support it, while the external troika of the European Union, ECB and IMF demand it. Democracy continues to be hollowed out by the European Union. And the issue of global warming, with its honeymoon period at the start of the century now well and truly over, has been overshadowed by the most recent crisis of capitalism. Given that the owners of capital and their political representatives in the G8 don't bring environmental destruction into their cost equation, it is hardly surprising that their main focus is on the economy and reducing costs to maximise profitability, and that real attempts to tackle climate change have been scuppered and shelved. On a global level, CO2 emissions have not fallen, but have been increased. The scientific community on global warming by and large agree that the projected path of current CO2 emissions are reaching tipping points, and both climate change and species extinction are just decades away, which will have devastating and irreversible effects for the continued health and life of the planet and its inhabitants. And this is not opinion, this is fact, and something that can bring the elements that we spoke of earlier closer together. They say the G8 are for peace. Ask yourself, can you achieve peace by bankrolling and expanding a huge military machine? Can you attain peace by supplying and training mercenary armies to help fight wars against democratically elected governments? Is peace sought through espionage, sabotage and propaganda? With global military spending in the region of $1.7 trillion annually, with the US comprising 41% and the G8 as a total comprising over 60%, we say that the G8 are not for peace, but they are for war. The G8, with the United States in the vanguard, will use both military and economic warfare against the country being defiant to the empire, under the pretext of peace and democracy. Recent wars in Syria, Lebanon, Libya, in Afghanistan and Iraq, or the use of blockades, sanctions, trade embargoes in places like Cuba, Iran, North Korea and Libya demonstrate that whether it is through NATO, a proxy country, or G8 nation itself, military wars have led to chaos, civil war and social destruction, while economic wars have crippled economies, leading to serious health and malnutrition problems, with the overall effect being a systematic impoverishment of the people. These are just other forms of class warfare the G8 will not hesitate to use in the future against those countries that will look to defy their masters. So as events unfold in Syria, or the next possible Syria, be it Turkey or Iran, those who truly wish for peace can find a common platform with the anti-imperialist forces. This is why the necessity to build international solidarity and unity is of utmost importance. Open class war is on the doorsteps of Europe. When it comes knocking, and in some cases it already has, We, the working people, need to be mobilised and organised and ready to fight back, ready to defend our gains, ready to advance our position in society, and ready to bring forward an alternative. And of course, they say there is no alternative. As the saying goes, if you tell a lie big enough and repeat it often enough, eventually people will come to believe it. And ever since the counter-revolutions in the former Soviet Union and its dismantling, this has been the doctrine by which politicians, scholars, the media, and anyone else allied to the imperialist powers swear by. And this seems to be the basket in which all their eggs are placed. The Communist Party of Ireland, along with our comrades abroad, say there is an alternative, and that alternative is socialism. It is the only system that can combine the needs of humanity with the needs of the planet and utilise the tremendous natural and technological resources for people, not profit. And Connolly was right when he suggested that the failure to build socialism would leave an Ireland still controlled by British finance capital. This was evident in the first half of the last century. This dependence or subjection was then transferred for more or less solely British domination to a combination of British, American and Franco-German interests. Ireland remained insufficiently financially independent to really be a sovereign state. So, an essential component of any transformative alternative towards socialism must be the simultaneous creation and use of our own indigenous capital and resources, and withdrawal from dependence on international finance capital and from those monopoly and imperialist alliances like the EU. And what demands would support this? 1. Repudiation of the socialised corporate debt. 2. The establishment of a state bank. 3. The establishing controls on capital. Abandoning the euro. Increasing the tax on capital, business and wealth. The planning of economic development and reduction of the role of the market as a determining force. The nationalisation of our oil, gas and our seas. And the development of renewable energy sources and reducing dependence on non-renewable energy. These demands challenge the very basis of the system's domination in Ireland and present an opportunity for our country to achieve a degree of sovereignty, to develop according to our needs that we have never had. In that sense, they are not for reforming capitalism, but for transforming the social and political system in Ireland towards socialism. These are demands that we must put to the trade union movement and the unorganised mass of workers, small farmers and fishermen to build an alliance for transformation. And this is an alternative which our politicians, the gatekeepers for monopoly capital, will violently suppress if necessary to stop it from spreading to the wider population. This is an alternative which the nations of the G8 fear the most. So join us in our war on war. March with us to the beat of the workers' drum. Fight against debt, austerity, poverty, hunger. Let your flag unfurl and show the colour red. And be proud of the international communist movement and what it stands for: peace, equality and workers' democracy. We, the Communist Party of Ireland, say let the ruling classes tremble at the idea of a transformative alternative that looks to overthrow the existing social and economic conditions and issue in an era of peace and prosperity for all mankind and advance a new era of socialism. Thank you.